The 2012 cartoon of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was famous for reintroducing characters from all corners of the Turtleverse. At the behest of Playmates, they began adapting multiple mutant characters, as this would present the opportunity for more action figure sales. However, the team behind the show didn't want to introduce completely new characters as mutants, because they felt these wouldn't generate enough engagement from the audience. It was following this pattern that the Mutagen Man was introduced into the show, in one of the most tragic arcs in the series. Join me today as I dive into the story of the Pulverizer, aka Mutagen Man. This version of the character originated as Timothy. His world was barely explored in the show, and as a result, we don't know his age or if he even had a family. We do know that he worked one summer driving an ice cream truck, so he was probably old enough to drive. One night, after witnessing a battle between the Turtles and Baxter Stockman, he decided to put on a Ninja Turtle costume and become the vigilante known as the Pulverizer. The Turtles met the Pulverizer by accident. It was during a test run of the Shell Razor, which was powered by a Krang power cell they took from the alien race. When they hit the streets, they noticed some purple dragons stealing equipment from a warehouse. To their surprise, they saw the Pulverizer confront them and almost get killed. The Turtles protected Timothy, and after seeing how unprepared he was for his role, they asked him to go home. Unfortunately, his bandana ties were caught by the closing doors of the Shell Razor, and the Turtles dragged him all the way to the lair. At the lair, Timothy recognized some Krang equipment from the Purple Dragon's loot. This was when the Turtles realized the Foot Clan was stealing from the Krang. Raph, Mikey, and Leo went out to investigate, while Don stayed behind to babysit Tim. Seeing that Tim had no self-awareness and was a danger to himself, Donnie decided to train him, hoping to give him a chance to survive. But Splinter, who had more experience training others, immediately noticed Tim's inability to learn and warned Donnie that becoming his sensei would make him responsible for whatever happened to him. This training was cut short by the sudden call from Mikey, who needed Donnie's help in coming up with a cure for Raph, who had been bitten by the poisonous bite of Fishface.
That's not possible! If he was bitten, it's venom, not poison!
Interesting. Get over here!
Donnie let Timothy drive the Shell Razor while he worked on a cure. It was a bumpy ride because Tim's past experience driving didn't require him to go this fast. After rescuing the rest of the Turtles and defeating Baxter, Fishface, and the Purple Dragons, they realized that the Krang power cell container had a leak and was, therefore, traceable by the Krang. The Turtles tried to return to the lair before being caught, but it was too late. The Krang had retrieved the power cell, and Timothy was of little help in stopping them. The Turtles decided not to continue with his training, which was a sensible action to take. Unfortunately, Timothy wasn't deterred by this and decided he would continue his training without them. That's how Timothy ended up joining the Bradford Dojo, and eventually the Foot Clan. After just a few weeks of training, he earned the rank of Ashigarusha. What he didn't know was that, at least in the writer's interpretation, that rank basically meant cannon fodder. After realizing Timothy's new role in the Foot Clan, the Turtles suggested he quit the clan. However, Timothy somehow misinterpreted their suggestion as asking him to be their spy. Tim sent them a tip later. The Foot Clan was stealing mutagen to create a mutant army of their own. Donnie was worried for Timothy, but after seeing him being useful for a change, Raph and Leo encouraged him to keep putting his life at risk to figure out what the Shredder's plan was. Leo justified this by saying that they could always remove Tim from harm's way. Unfortunately, upon meeting with Tim, they got found out by Dog Pound and Fishface. Timothy pretended to be against the Turtles to keep his cover during that fight, but the clan was successful in stealing the mutagen. Leo insisted on keeping Tim inside the clan to learn more. With the mutagen in his hands, the Shredder ordered his minions to mutate the Pulverizer as a test. They tied him up to one of their bikes and took him to the lab. Timothy called the Turtles to tell them he actually volunteered for the experiment. From his perspective, it was a win-win. They would conduct their tests, and Tim would mutate, finally reaching the same level as the Turtles, a real superhero. While simplistic, it wasn't too different from many of the Marvel heroes' origins, and from his point of view, not being a mutant was the only thing he saw as missing to be as efficient as the Turtles. Despite the Turtles' help, Timothy proceeded with the experiment, bathing himself in ooze and turning into a translucent blob with his internal organs floating inside. Exactly why this happened is unclear, but given that Timothy was always covered from head to toe, it's likely that he hadn't had any contact with other animals to borrow some of the much-needed DNA. After realizing the experiment didn't work in his favor, he got really furious and started attacking everyone. The Turtles forced him inside a container and took him to the lair. Donatello promised him that he would find a way to turn him back to normal. Still, from the perspective of Splinter and the other Turtles, Timothy finally got what he wanted. It's unclear whether Donatello ever attempted to locate Timothy's family or friends. Donatello had no choice but to shift focus to a cure after April's father was mutated into a bat. The incident drove a wedge between April and the Turtles, and with that distance came an opening. Casey Jones started getting closer to her. That didn't sit well with Donnie. His jealousy started creeping in, and he vented constantly to Timothy. What Donnie didn't realize was that while he ranted about April and Casey, Timothy was quietly eating mutagen, growing stronger right under his nose. Donatello's efforts to find a cure were slow, but at least he gave Timothy the ability to speak through an intercom. In a moment of distraction, Timothy consumed an entire canister of mutagen, which enabled him to develop arms and legs. He then took April's picture and escaped from the lair to find her. After hearing Donnie talk about her non-stop, he developed a crush of his own. April and Casey managed to survive the attack from Tim, and then the Turtles found him. It was then that Mikey rebranded him as Mutagen Man. In his new form, he could throw acid from his hands, which made him a formidable foe for the Turtles. After figuring out Mutagen Man's strange reaction to the mutagen, Donnie wondered if he was the key to finding a cure for April's dad. He baited Timothy with a canister of what looked like mutagen, but was in reality a failed attempt at a cure. Timothy ate the ooze, which immediately froze him. This wasn't Donnie's intention. Still, he promised Tim he would find a cure for his condition. But, unfortunately, he would need more than just a cure. Mutagen Man would need to be thawed, a process that would occur naturally after 70 years. The show ended without solving this plot, but we can assume he escaped at some point, because in the series finale, his canister was empty at the bottom of the Scaletails arena ditch, which also means that he may have met his end there. But hey, that future was 50 years into the future, so maybe he thought earlier after all. According to Ciro Nieli, the Pulverizer was initially going to be a comedic uber superhero named the Badger, a name that was already taken. While the idea of turning Timothy into Mutagen Man was already in the plans for the season, the decision was met with great debate and resistance by the creative team. It was definitely more interesting than a random foot soldier getting mutated. The audience already knew the Pulverizer, and his arc would resonate more because of that. It also made sense for his character. He was very impulsive and lacked patience, so he would be the kind of character who would jump into the ooze as a shortcut for becoming a superhero. Ultimately, the decision to mutate Timothy won. The character was voiced by Roger Craig Smith, and his debut was written by Russ Carney and Ron Corsillo. There's an important lesson to be learned from Mutagen Man's story. Timothy was eager to jump into dangerous situations. He wanted to be equal to the Turtles, and instead of taking the longer path, he chose to cut corners, which ultimately ruined his life. One could view this arc as a cautionary tale for children trying to imitate the Turtles and putting themselves in danger. But, intentionally or not, Mutagen Man's story also warns kids that people might push you down a dangerous path without ever owning their part in it. This was the case with the Turtles. Only Donatello felt compelled to help Tim. And while Splinter had reasons not to make himself responsible for Tim's actions, the way he and the Turtles talked to Tim once he was in a jar was quite mean. While jarring, I guess this was a way to make kids realize they were ultimately responsible for their actions. If they didn't want to end up as a trophy in someone's lab, then they better stay out of trouble. What makes this character truly unforgettable is that his story remains unresolved. Donatello created anti-mutagen solutions later in the series, but never found a way to thaw Timothy. I can't help but think that Agent Bishop could have helped him turn Timothy back to normal, or at least closer to a dignified way of living. What do you think about the Turtles' attitude towards Timothy? Do you think his condition was reversible? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.